So let me guess, you went to the hobby store, you bought one of those cute dollhouse kits, only to realize that it's tedious, kind of daunting, and the instructions don't make a lot of sense? Well, that's what I'm here for. My name's Ashley, I'm a miniature artist, and we're gonna go from the box to the finished product. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do in this kit, which is called Enjoy the Time, which I just love, this little bookcase scene. What I did was I pre-portioned everything into these little bags, and we're going to start with the bookshelf. Everything for the bookshelf is in this bag. You don't have to do this, but I just found it easier sectioning everything off before I got started making anything. So we're going to pull all the books. Every single one of those sheets is a small book, and those got really tedious, but I'll go over those later on in the video. But first, we're going to go over the actual bookcase itself. And the bookcase is just a few wood pieces that you glue together, and they actually make it really intuitive and simple. So we're going to separate all the pieces first and go from there. So right here, we're just gonna kind of organize everything so we know where everything is, make sure we're not missing anything. I highly encourage you to take everything out of your bag. Each kit comes with a parts list. So going through everything beforehand, even though we're not making these items right now, just makes it easier to know, okay, I have this, I'm not missing it. I don't need to contact the company or go buy another kit or anything like that. It always makes life easier. So I'm going to start with pulling out one of the sides, and I'm going to use my favorite Instacure glue here, which is a quick set glue from one of my favorite local gaming stores. And we're going to just dab it on different parts. The first being where the first shelf is going to go, and holding it in place for just a few seconds really. And I love using this measuring triangle. It really makes it easier to keep it straight and keep it square when you're putting everything together. And we're going to do that for all 4 shelves there before we put on the second leg of the shelf. Same process as before, just using a little bit of Instacure dotted on each part, and I sped this up a little bit just because it is such a long, tedious process. You'll see that a few times throughout here. I kind of speed things up a little bit just to make it easier to watch the process, because these kits will take you anywhere from, this one took me 10 to 15 hours, and that starts with piecing everything out all the way to actually assembling the project. So just a little side note, something to keep in mind whenever you're working on these kit projects. They do take a little bit of time, but the results are just so worth it. So here I'm actually gluing the 2 shelving pieces I worked on together, and then we're going to add the end piece to stand this whole thing up. And there you have it. There's the finished bookshelf standing up by itself. It didn't take long to hold these pieces together. That instant set is really perfect for little wood pieces like this. It's a 3 to 4 second hold glue time, and it really works phenomenally well, as you can see with the shelf. Now we'll get to working on the stuff that's actually going to go on the shelf. So first we're going to start with the little greens flower pot, and the kit gives you always way too much of the greens, but you know, it's great for using later on. So the first thing I like to do is just get a few pieces in the pot without any glue to kind of decide how I want it to look. Do I like how they're going in? Do I need to change anything? And then I really like to just dump a bunch of hot glue into the middle of the flower pot on top of my cutting mat. That way it releases easily. And it gives me just enough time to get these pieces in before they set, and I just find it so much easier getting glue into the pot without making it a huge mess. And it sets pretty quickly since it is hot glue, and then if there's any on the bottom that doesn't make it sit correctly, you can scrape it off later. So now we're going to start on the labels for the herb pots. So we're just going to cut those off, cut them up, and glue them onto our little pots. This one says pasta. You can't really read it. I tried making it as easy to read as possible, but here we're going to use a little liquid latex glue that I got out of a different kit, and I just find it so nice. I've been looking for this glue everywhere, so if anybody knows of where to get a nice liquid latex glue, please let me know in the comments. I have been looking for these types of glue since I made my last project, which I didn't film. So yeah, it'd be great to find some more of that because I'm obviously getting quite low. Here's the second pot. I can't remember exactly what this one said. I think it was some other kind of herb like oregano or something like that. And what do you know? It actually says corn. Okay, never mind. I don't remember what I made. Next, we're going to work on the birdhouse. This one's super fun because you're piecing together a little paper house, essentially. So we're going to go ahead and cut off the roof piece, set that aside, and get started on cutting out the actual birdhouse. I love little sewing scissors for things like this. It makes it so much easier to cut out small pieces. Next, we're going to use an X-Acto knife and we're going to score each of the sides without cutting all the way through, obviously, just to make it easier to bend this and fold it without bending the entire thing and keeping the parts that need to be flat still flat. Always make sure you use a fairly sharp X-Acto knife and use the lightest pressure you can. Play around with it until you see how far you can really go with your X-Acto blade until you feel like you can trust it. So it only does the little bend and does not hurt or damage your paper. Next, I'm using a little bit of the white glue that comes with these kits, and we're just going to glue the pieces together. And there's how the birdhouse looks after gluing all the edges together. Next, we're going to start on the roof. Same concept, scoring and folding along the lines. Doing a little glue underneath the flaps. And then all you have to do is bend it in half to get it to go onto the roof and then glue the roof in place. How nice that turned out. I love these little birdhouses, and it looked great on the shelf too in the finished product. Next, we're going to work on the seed packets that go on the bottom shelf. And I couldn't really read what was on them. I can tell that they're all flowers, but when you get down to 1/24th scale, it can get a little difficult to read what's on your pieces of paper, things you're putting in your miniature. So once again, a pretty simple cutout. And then we're going to be scoring the lines and then gluing these pieces together, just like the birdhouse. I love using tweezers for doing some parts of glue because then your fingerprint doesn't end up on it. And there you have it. There's the first one. And we'll do the exact same thing for the other two as well. Honestly, the more I worked on these 3 seed packets, I wish I had put little grains of salt or pepper or something inside of it just to give it some 3D effect. But I didn't think of it at the time, but definitely something you can try in your own miniature. Next, we're going to come to the ever-dreaded books. Now, these are super fun. The finished products are super fun, I should say, but my goodness, are these tedious. So we're just as a foreshadowing of if you get one of these kits, they can take a while, but they really teach you how folding a book together kind of works and how much straight edges and lines work. So I'm going to speed through this first one. Basically all you do, I tried using a triangle to make it straighter, but in the end it took so much less time to just try and make sure the edges were straight as you went along, and then gluing the ends to make sure it was flat. And the end result actually looked pretty good of just folding it and trying to keep the edges straight as you go, and my opinion, I recommend that a lot more than trying to use a triangle. So we're just going to speed through these next ones of how these books get folded. Same procedure, I stopped using the triangle and I just kept folding. And this bigger triangle that you're seeing right here actually had a wider edge on it, which was great for the books with wider spines. So that was pretty much the only thing I used the triangle for at this point, was making the spines wide enough for the book to go inside and still make it look like a book and not just some rounded over edge. Turned out really great in the end, honestly. And that's all the books finished up together. We'll put those in the bookshelf when we finish everything else. Now we're going to start on the desk. This piece was really fun. I love these little modern desks that they put into miniatures now. And that little blue piece there that you're seeing on top does not come with the kit, but I will explain it a little bit more as we go along. We're first going to start with putting the desktop piece, the little wood grain piece, on top of the actual wooden desk. All you have to do is cut it out, get your favorite glue, and smooth it onto the top of the desk. Now, my favorite thing to do for smoothing a piece of paper with glue onto something hard is I like to spread out the glue like you can see with my finger there. But even after that, after wiping the glue off of your finger, I really love getting a thin paint scraper. I think that's what these are called. I'm not entirely sure. I bought mine at Hobby Lobby. But you can take these and just pull it along the top while holding down your piece of paper. And sometimes glue comes out the side if you use too much, which is totally fine. You can just wipe it off the edge, but it really makes your paper look straight. Next, just to make this simple, I know I hate spider strings from hot glue as well, but they can always be pulled off. But just to make this quick and easy, putting some hot glue in the holes and shoving the legs in really made this simple. After pulling the spider strings off, now you can see that it's a perfectly finished desk. So the next part is going to be the laptop that sits on the desk. Now, they give you this little piece of flimsy pink foam, which the last time I made a laptop with this, as you can see here, it turned out very flimsy. So I grabbed this piece of cardstock that came off of a glasses case, actually, and I thought I liked the back. It looked much more like a metallic back of a laptop anyway. So I just put regular white glue on top of this and made it so that the blue metallic would be on the back of the computer. I just waited for this to dry, flattened it out to make sure there were no bubbles, and cut it out. Cutting it out, I then tried to bevel the edges a little bit to make it look more like a laptop, and scored the very center of this. I also did some marks on the end so I could see from the back, which is where I needed to score this, where I was going to have to cut it. And you can kind of see it tries to move to the other side, and then I just made a line of where I needed to score it. And this made it fold so perfectly. It was straight, actually looked like the back of a desktop computer. So this is how I preferred to make the laptop. To me, this just looks so much more realistic and nice and didn't have this strange foamy back. Next, we're going to start on the chair in this scene. And we're going to set aside the fabric and the felt for now and get started on the frame of the chair. Now, just being completely honest, I cannot tell you how much of a pain this chair frame was to put together. You can actually see I'm fidgeting with it for a while purely because it was so difficult to get the concept of how I was going to make this whole thing straight and have all the pieces work seamlessly together, because the instruction book doesn't really describe it, just says put this here, and it should work perfectly. So we're going to do our best. I started out with just kind of sizing everything, and I ended up resorting to this Loctite super glue to get things to stick very quickly. As much as I love the Insecure, I had to sit and wait for these pieces to hopefully be straight forever. And the Loctite actually made it pretty simple. So we're just going to continue around with this Loctite glue. And every once in a while you'll have stuff like this happen, but don't worry, it's not the end of the world. I like to get some isopropyl alcohol, at least 91%, and put it in these little paint trays. Take a little brush and brush it over the area where you got your finger stuck, and it will begin to separate without any real issues. So a little hack for if you ever glue yourself together. We'll keep going around with the Loctite glue, being a little bit more careful this time. And doing my best to get the other side in while keeping it somewhat straight. There was one piece that refused to connect no matter what I did, so you will see that along the back of this one. But with the chair cover on it, you can see it there on the left, that one did not connect no matter what I did. But fortunately, the cushion sitting on top, you really won't be able to see it. And the cushions are what we're going to work on next. So all we had to do here was cut out some pieces of this felt to match the size of the wood, and you just glue that felt on top of the wood. And that'll create a nice little cushion for these cushions, which makes sense why they call it that. We're going to use some regular white glue to glue this felt on, and the reason I used white glue is even though hot glue or maybe some other things are faster, it can leave lumps underneath, so being able to spread it around with your finger and then put the felt on just made it easier and less lumpier in the finished product. Next, we're going to cut out the fabric. Now, I personally am still learning how to wrap fabric around miniatures, so this process took a little bit for me to figure out correctly. All the instructions tell you is to cut out enough fabric for it to overlap, so I kind of cut out a little bit too much and sized it down as I went. And to start with your first folds, this really worked out well, just flattening out some glue with my finger and pulling the fabric over top. But for me, the edges are what really get me, sometimes figuring out how to get fabric to move correctly the way you want it to. Let's just say it this way, there is a reason I am not a seamstress. So unfortunately, I fumbled with this for a while until I decided how I wanted this to work. In the end, for the edges, I ended up resorting to hot glue. Unfortunately, I really hate using hot glue for fabric since it can get bulky and make it thicker, which I don't really like a whole lot, but I used as small pieces as I can without burning my skin off and folded these edges in. If you guys know of better ways to fold fabric, please share it with me in the comments, as this is one thing in miniatures I am still in the process of continually learning. Thankfully, the cushion turned out pretty nice. This is the back piece here, and it slid on without an issue. Same process here with the second cushion. I just went straight for the hot glue this time. I was so tired of wasting my time trying to figure out how to get corners and edges to work, so I went straight for the big guns this time, and in the end I wasn't really happy with my decision of doing that. So again, I encourage you to find the glue that really works for you when it comes to fabric over top of wooden pieces. I'm sure over time this will get better, but as of now, this has probably been the hardest part of miniatures for me, is definitely fabric. In the end though, we got it to lay flat and it went down on the seat cushion fairly easily, and I just used some of my Instacure to lay those pieces down. Pushing it in for just a couple seconds got it to stick. And like I said, because of the cushions, you can't really see the back piece that didn't connect, but we turned out with a beautiful little chair. Next, we're going to start on the floor lamp that goes in this miniature, and these are all kinds of little beads and metal pieces, which I love for 1/24th scale because beads seem to be the perfect size for this scale. Now, a lot of times wire will not come straight, so usually you can pull it out and roll it around to try to get it to straighten. And then I just used my ruler that came with these kits to cut everything to size. Cutting the second half that ends up being the lampshade. And now we're going to glue the lampshade onto the actual arm. So I really prefer to use Loctite for metal pieces because all my other glues, even the liquid latex, really do not seem to connect metal pieces. So as of now, I've been using this Loctite super glue and everything goes on so fast and so efficiently, and I don't have to worry about sitting there waiting for a metal piece to dry. This is what the top of the lampshade looks like after gluing a few of those beads on with the Loctite glue. Next, we're going to work on the base, which is how the lampshade stands up. It only stands up with glue in the miniature. It's not self-supporting, but in order to get this piece on, it seemingly did not want to stand up with Loctite right away. So I used my cut mat, which works really well with hot glue, glued it into place, and then I poured some liquid Loctite into the center here, and surprisingly did not stick to the mat too hard, and because of the hot glue, it came off very easily after that Loctite dried. And I found this to be a pretty easy process. Obviously it hadn't dried all the way there right away, but it ended up drying perfectly in place. These are my favorite rounded tweezers for bending metal, and I just use them in a couple of different spots along the length of this to get a nice 45-degree curve. And in just a couple different places, I used 3 different spots to bend this very carefully and got it to do its nice curve without leaving much of a dent in the metal. Next, we're going to put on the rest of these beads the way the instructions have it laid out to kind of show the curve in this metal. Placing a few more beads on here. And now we're going to use these tweezers to kind of hold the lampshade in place while we place the Loctite glue on the end of the lamp pole so the shade can stay in place and not really move around a whole lot. We're going to leave this here for a little bit and we'll come back to it when we finish the miniature. Next, we're going to get started on the actual frame, the walls and floor of this miniature. This is a little clock that goes on the back wall. I just loved how this whole thing went together. So these are the two pieces, your wall and your floor. This is the floor. It has paint on all sides. You'll see the sticker on the bottom indicating it is the base. And the wall piece will have one painted side and one unpainted side. The bottom will be unpainted on the edge. And this brown side here is actually where your wallpaper is going to go. After cutting out the wallpaper, we're going to kind of note where that blank piece is so you know what the bottom of this wall is, so you know where to place the wallpaper. After spreading this out evenly in a nice thin layer, you don't want any bubbling with this. Wipe your finger off and then kind of center the wallpaper where you want it to be. Make sure it's not overlapping or showing any of the back wall. And then grab your scraper or anything flat you'd like to use for this and just start scraping it to the edges. And after each pass, always make sure to wipe off your scraper and the edge of your miniature, just so that the glue doesn't continue onto your wallpaper later on. Always make sure it's dry. Just a few more passes here and we will have this wall piece complete. Look how nice and flat this looks after smoothing everything out. Now we're going to start on the floor. There is paint on every side of this, so you can really use any side you want. Now we're going to cut out the flooring, and it's the same process. Just make sure you decide which way you want this wood grain to go as you're putting it down. And there's our finished floor. Now I'm going to use this back edge right here as the edge of my wall. But first I'm going to put the clock on before I forget. There's been several times I've made miniatures like this and I completely forgot to put something on the back wall after I've already put the whole miniature together. So we're going to decide where our clock goes, flatten that down, and unfortunately I kind of raced through this, so I think I forgot to scrape off some glue, so you'll kind of see a little bit of it over the clock there, but in the end it did make a huge noticeable difference, just something to keep in mind. We're going to use our Loctite glue just because this is a very top heavy piece and I wanted to make sure this got down quickly and without a whole lot of issues. So leave a nice thin line along the back there, and using the triangles here is a great way to make sure your pieces are up and down. If you do not have a squaring device, I think that's what they're called. I know that you can buy them on Amazon. I've yet to get one of those, so I just use triangles until it's basically solid in place. So I went ahead and just glued the bookcase into place. It was as simple as placing down a little bit of instant set, quick set glue and placing the bookcase down. Now we're going to shove all our little tiny pieces that we made earlier onto our shelf, and we're going to start with the birdhouse. I love using the liquid latex here. It just made things so much easier. It sets pretty quick and it lets you kind of move things around a little bit before you place it. I started with gluing several books together in a couple different areas. And the instructions showed some of these books flaring open, which is kind of how I left this. And you probably noticed the flower pot moving a smidge there, and that's because somehow it tilted while I was making this, and if you look in the finished product, it is a little bit tilted. I ended up fixing the flower pot later on, so the finished product that I have now is technically flat. But apologies that I didn't see that beforehand. Now these other bigger books were pretty tall, and some of them just did not want to fit, so they ended up laying flat in this bookcase. But to me it kind of gave more of a disheveled, I'm reading through all these things quickly and putting them back so I can get to the next book kind of look. So I placed several of these in that manner just to give that kind of disheveled idea of just moving on quickly. Let's get to the next book already. I love some of these. The detail in these storybooks were just so pretty. I had to show some of them off. And some of these I really did want to lay flat instead of letting them all flare out, so just gluing the binding together, gluing the edges together and holding them flat really made a difference there, and it got them to stand up straight. And then I got to showcase how cute some of these covers were. We're going to speed through the last part of this here, just placing some of the other books, gluing them down, gluing some of them together, gluing the pages so they would stay closed a little bit better, and grouping them together on the shelves. I love using the tweezers for holding them together because that meant I wasn't going to be gluing my fingers to the pages and possibly ripping them apart. I also like using these C-clamps to hold the books together while I was gluing other ones just to get it to stick better and faster, and I wasn't going to sit there holding it. The seed packets here went on the bottom, and I tried to place them so I could showcase one of the backs along with what it looked like in the front. I still wish I would have made those more 3D, but you can still see how they look, and I think this bookshelf turned out really nicely. Next, we're going to start placing our furniture. I placed the chair with enough space for the coffee table, and tried to place the chair in a way to where you could see that they were actively sitting and using their laptop. We're just going to glue this down, and once again, I absolutely loved how this cardstock kept it up so straight. Just holding it down for a second got it in place without it bubbling too bad. And then just gluing down the base of the chair. Now we'll glue down the feet, and the liquid latex I really liked for this because it didn't really show where the glue was after placing it. It dried pretty flat, which was fantastic. We're going to come back to the floor lamp now, which was arguably one of the hardest parts of this build, was placing this thing. And just like I had mentioned before, most glues are so hard to work with, and so I decided to use the super glue, the Loctite super glue, but even that did not want to set this floor lamp up, and I think I held that for several minutes. So for this, unfortunately, I ended up resorting to hot glue just to get this thing to stick in place, and it did work. You can see a little bit of that hot glue at the bottom, but honestly, at this point, I just wanted to get this thing in, and it ended up looking really nice in the end and not super noticeable. This last part is going to be the clear plexiglass case that goes around this miniature, kind of like a dust cover. Actually, now that I look at it, it actually says dust cover, what do you know? So I numbered all of these with what it said in the instructions, just so I would know what piece was what. I ended up doing them on the other side because this side you don't pull off right away, so I wouldn't lose my place of what was what. And you can tell that my chair is sitting in the corner. I did film this beforehand, but it just made more sense to have it here. Now this paper was so difficult to pull off. It took me quite a while to get all these little pieces off. None of them wanted to come in one go, so it took a while to cleanly get this off without getting my fingerprints too much on the plexiglass. Nails are a great way to get this stuff off, but if you are doing this with your nails, just be careful that you don't dig into your nail bed too deeply. I did kind of scrape myself underneath my nail a few times, but I would hesitate from using X-Acto knives as you don't want to scratch the plexiglass. Finally got all these pieces off. Hi! Now we're going to use some painter's tape to get all these edges together before we glue it. I really like this process because it holds the frame together before you start gluing. And for this I did use Loctite. Now putting it on these edges here didn't really seem to work too well for me. I'm still looking for a good glue for these. Now the last miniature I made which was actually bigger than this, the Loctite worked great for this dust cover, but for some reason this time around it just did not want to cooperate. So if you guys know of a good glue that works well for this plexiglass, I would love to hear it in the comments so I can use it in the next video. Air jig here would have been really good too, just to get the pieces to hold easier. Now I will say this was probably one of my most egregious mistakes I made with this miniature in putting Loctite in the crease there. I thought it was gonna dry clear and much easier, but honestly I hated the outcome of how it looked of just shoving the glue in those corners, and you'll see it in the end why this was such a huge mistake. But we'll keep going for now, adding more tape as we go to get the pieces to stay together. But again, I would say dot the glue onto the piece before you place them together, just like you did with the wall and the floor, and do not do what I'm doing right here. And like I said, you are going to see in a second why this was such a terrible idea. And here it is. When you pull off that contact paper on the other side, it is going to leave such a terrible line. Those are not fingerprints, that's glue. But it did fit over exactly the way it needed to, so I ended up just placing it. I tried cleaning the glass off as much as I could, and then I just put it in place. And here we are with the finished project. Thank you guys so much for watching this instructional tutorial on Mayberry Street's Enjoy the Time. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so I can make more of these fun videos for you in the future.